Welcome to Looking at Lyme, an educational podcast of the Canadian Lyme Disease Foundation, designed to increase awareness, empower listeners with expert knowledge, and explore solutions. I'm Kim Cairns. In this episode, we speak with Dr. Michael Howlett, a veterinarian based out of Cumberland County, Nova Scotia. When Dr. Mike returned to Nova Scotia to practice veterinary medicine, he did not expect to see so much Lyme disease. However, his location on the South Shore proved to be a hotspot for Lyme. Dr. Mike has become very passionate about increasing awareness and prevention of Lyme disease during his time as a veterinarian. We are very interested in what goes on for non-human animals and how this might affect the human experience. Welcome to the show, Dr. Mike. How long have you been a veterinarian?
I've been a practicing veterinarian for about 13 years now. So I came into it a little bit later in life, non-traditional route, so to speak. Come into it with some life experience. I've done lots of different things. I've operated heavy equipment. I've, drove taxi cab. I went to flight school. I trained as a firefighter. I went to clown school, and then I went to vet school. So it was a roundabout way to get here.
Yes. Well, an interesting background. Where did you go to school?
I went to the Atlantic Veterinary College in PEI, Charlottetown.
Okay. People with Lyme often comment that their dog is more likely to get the diagnosis of Lyme disease than they are. Could you give us a brief summary of what you have learned about Lyme disease in vet school?
Well, you're going through probably your second year, all of the ologies, your parasitology, your bacteriology, your virology. So you have a tremendous amount of information kind of all coming at you at once. And you're trying to get like the highlights of each thing, to see where it is. And a lot of that application comes after the fact, after you've graduated, and you start seeing what kind of things are rolling out in the area where you're living or working. So, we live to learn about everything, but there's things that we don't see here, at least not yet. If we're talking ticks and Rocky Mountain spotted fever and things like that, it's not so much on our radar here. But Lyme was one of those things that, we knew we were going to see a lot of.
Mm-hmm. What is your experience with Lyme and other tick-borne diseases in pets?
Well, traditionally, northern Nova Scotia, Amherst, the area that I live and practice in now, 20 years ago, I would say you would probably be hard-pressed to find ticks here, just in general. My grandfather was a logger. I grew up in the woods, spent tons of times, and I can't ever recall seeing ticks or worrying about ticks. If you went to some places in the province, you'd hear a little bit about ticks, if you were down in the valley region. But that is a completely different situation now. So after I left vet school, I moved to Ontario, practiced for a year before I came back home. And, nobody's really talking about Lyme or ticks where we were in the Ottawa Valley region. Heartworm was kind of the big emerging thing with pets. You're seeing that in some of the major centers. When I come home, I actually moved down to the South Shore, to the Bridgewater region. Now, I never realized growing up and living in Nova Scotia how different regions of the province can be. So once I get down there, it's a whole new reality. There's a perfect little microclimate there. It's all a little bit warmer. They've actually were dealing with Lyme for probably 30 or 40 years in that small little region. And it's just kind of expanded outward from there. Now, in Bridgewater, we would see Lyme on a regular basis. I half-heartedly joke we could see Lyme dogs almost every single day. It was a big deal. When I first went to Bridgewater, I believe the human physicians were having a big seminar. Like people from all over the world had come to Nova Scotia, 2013, 2014. And it's, Lyme all of a sudden is on a provincial radar. You're seeing it on the news. People are talking about it. But in Bridgewater, it was like a constant. You could go to the pharmacy and you're going to get some medication for the tick bite, or you're going to look at the kids in the little subdivision where I live, and out of 8 of them, probably 6 of them had Lyme by the time they were 10 diagnosed. So really heavy prevalence of Lyme in that area.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've seen is when we learn in school that Lyme is one of those things often that has a lot of vague symptoms in not just in people but in pets. It could be a fever that comes and goes. It could be lethargy. It could be lameness. Those sorts of things. In the very rare situations, you can get what's called Lyme nephropathy. So when we have Lyme nephropathy, those are kind of the worst of the worst cases. We know if we screen and test every single dog, probably 85% of our test positives aren't showing us any signs of illness. They're just normal tail wagging, walking in. A radar starts going off when we've got that young dog that's acting really lame for no known reason, almost like an old dog with arthritis. And in Bridgewater, you could probably bet your hat that if we test this dog, it's probably going to come up with Lyme. So one of the things with the Lyme nephritis, that happens statistically in about less than 5% of cases. And when I first started practice, maybe every 1 or 2 years, we would see like a case that we suspect. We don't always get the opportunity to take kidney biopsies. That's not going to happen in veterinary medicine. So you're kind of putting the pieces together and saying, okay, this dog is Lyme. He's really sick. He's losing weight. His kidneys are failing. This is a likely Lyme nephritis case. So we went from seeing those one maybe every couple of years to a couple a year. The last year that I practiced in Bridgewater before moving, between March and probably late July, I think we've seen 16 or 18 cases that were highly suspicious for Lyme nephritis. Now, that was probably an anomaly, like a blurb in the whole numbers game, but we're seeing these dogs come in that had previously been otherwise healthy, and this is severely debilitating. They're losing weight, they're a rack of bones, they're really sick, and they unfortunately carry a very, very poor prognosis. Less than 2% of those dogs are probably going to make it. We're looking at 6 to 8 weeks from time of diagnosis to probably death in those cases. Now, on a personal note, right around the same time, a family member got a new puppy. And, it's a little Mastiff puppy. It came in from Quebec. And they asked me, what should I be doing? I want to do everything I can to protect the dog. So I said, you want to get the vaccine. You want to go on a preventative right away. Probably think about insurance, just given the breed of the dog. So they did all that. They were very vigilant. They did all the proper steps. And when that dog turned about 18 months, it started acting kind of funny. It was limping and lameness. And I advised them, why don't you go into the vet up there and get it checked out? And if they don't ask to do a Lyme test, ask them to run one for you. And the dog had tested positive for Lyme and actually became a Lyme nephropathy case. And that's probably one of the only cases I know, and whether it was early detection, it was, rapid intervention. She actually made it through it, but it was really touch and go for probably 6 to 8 weeks. It did end up having a shortened lifespan, suffered some consequences life term. But, when I moved back home, that's one of the things I use as an example for people, like even when we do all the right things, bad things can happen. What we don't know is, because then we never tested the dog before it got vaccinated, whether it had been exposed as a puppy before they even got it here.
How come there's a vaccination for pets and not for humans?
Well, there was a vaccine for people, and I'm out of my wheelhouse here because human medicine is a different beast than what I'm used to. But from what I understand, that either it wasn't trialing well, or right around that time there was a lot of merging in pharmaceutical companies, and it kind of went away. So it's my understanding that they're looking at maybe re-releasing that vaccine.
Right.
For people, for whatever the issues were with it, or whatever marketing or thoughts were around it. I do believe that potentially may be coming back.
Do you recommend to your people that they get the vaccination for their pets?
Well, every dog should probably be evaluated for risk factors. But I believe that in this region, it probably should be part of your core vaccines for all dogs. I've seen dogs that lived in the city that barely touch grass test positive for Lyme. We actually had clients this spring who have AstroTurf, and they come in and their dog had ticks. They're pretty widespread. Given the amount that we see now in this part of the province, really believe that all dogs should probably be vaccinated unless they've got some other Lyme condition that they shouldn't be.
Right.
So we know that no vaccine is perfect and no prevention is perfect. Yeah. But if the odds are against that and we factor them both together, then the odds are going to be incredibly small, if we're taking it on two different fronts.
How is tick territory changing?
I think we're kind of coming into like a perfect storm situation with this. We can look statistically at kind of progression of ticks, and 20 to 40 kilometers a year is what they expect growth outward from centers where it is. But there's different factors. We've had a string of very mild winters in the Maritimes. We've got climate change affecting even to the species of ticks we can see here. We've got a lot of urban sprawl. So I don't think it's just the deer, but the birds and the migration and the pathway and the temperature and the environment, everything kind of put together. So kind of one of the key indicators for us when we're talking to people about Lyme and Lyme risk in their animals is that 0 degrees, 4 degrees sort of cutoff. We used to think that we just had to do prevention from May to November, and we're okay once we get a frost and snow. But when we look at activity, we know that they'll probably crawl through the snow, and at 4 degrees air temperature, they're looking for a blood meal. Mm-hmm. And if we look back at kind of trends in Nova Scotia, we could go back to like 2008 before we don't see at least one weekend a month where we're going above +4. So our new reality is it could be 10 or 12 or even 14 February or March. Yes. When everyone's out and we're wearing T-shirts, the ticks are looking for something to eat too.
I'm from Calgary originally.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran wilderness programs in the Rockies. And at the time, we were concerned about Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Mm-hmm. But that was a narrow window of time from May through to the end of the summer, and then not a problem. We did tick checks on the kids that were out in the wilderness. So, and only encountered a few. But now that situation has changed.
They're hardy creatures, that's for sure.
Yes. Is the public waking up to the threat?
I've been back in Amherst for a little over 4 years now, and just the awareness has changed so much here. Traditionally, we never worried about ticks, but more and more people come in and they're aware of Lyme, they're aware of ticks. As every year it's kind of the same story. We see more and more. I've never had ticks before, and they're everywhere. I'm pulling ticks off my dog every day. Those sorts of things. That's just the new reality, and we see it encroaching into New Brunswick. I believe PEI is considered endemic for Lyme now as well.
Does Lyme get talked about at veterinarian conferences?
Maybe not so much targeting Lyme at a conference. Generally, it's a small world in veterinary medicine, and you're going to kind of congregate at a few of these different conferences, with the big ones being in the U.S. Mm-hmm. But I would say that most of the Lyme information probably does come from the pharmaceutical companies. That's their angle. They're looking for the prevention, but they do fund a lot of good research about prevalence. They do track some of those things. So we're going to get probably more information from them regarding the latest studies than we would say at an annual conference, where people are looking for so many different things that Lyme disease probably isn't at the top of the list for most of the participants.
Right. How often do you diagnose a pet with Lyme, roughly?
That's one of those things that is so
Yeah,
variable.
right.
It depends on what's coming in. When I say in Bridgewater almost every day, it seemed like that. I would say less so here. So we could maybe see 8 cases one week and not see another case for a month.
Mm.
We're always probably going to see a boom in the spring and the fall when people are out and they're noticing the ticks on the animal. But it all depends on why they're coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
would say a vast majority of our clients are new because we're a newer clinic. So we don't have as many older wellness
Right.
appointments as an established clinic may have. But
Mm-hmm.
from what I see here, it's more and more all the time. I can only imagine that the bigger centers and the bigger clinics are likely diagnosing this every day.
Hmm. Do you have any examples of a human contracting Lyme from their pet?
I don't believe that's a mode of transmission. That our biggest risk factor is being in the same area as the dog. We look at some of the preventatives and how they work. So some of them are going to be a contact kill for the tick. It's going to jump on, it's going to do its thing, the tick's going to die. But other ones, they need to take a blood meal. So that tick could walk around on the dog for 2 or 3 days, even before it decides it's going to take a blood meal.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a potential. And I talk to people about this regarding their lifestyle. So if you're camping down at Kejimkujik, which is like super high tick area, then I always tell them, maybe at least this month you want to consider a different medication for your dog so that it's not going to bring them into the tent at night.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of the preventatives that you mentioned? What's your normal course of discussion about ticks with pet owners?
Well, it has to be a little bit individualized for what's going on. So Advantix is one. That was a topical. That one's been around for a long time. It works by paralyzing the tick. It does have some issues with cats. So if the dog and the cat share a lot of space, we have to be cautious about that.
Mm.
Once it's dry, it's not an issue, but the first 24 hours is a recommendation to keep them apart. People with small children sometimes don't like the topicals if they're petting the
Mm-hmm.
dog. Sometimes it's a convenience thing. So the other ones are typically flavored and they're chewable. So, we don't worry about the cats if the
Right.
dog's on the chewable. We don't worry about the kids. That's not an issue. From what I understand through the modes of action, it kills them fast enough that some of these chewables actually have a preventative label claim versus just a protective label claim. So they do work pretty fast, but that comes back to that if you want the hitchhikers to come in or you don't want the hitchhikers to come into the house. Because if you're concerned about the dog bringing them in, then you might want to consider this medication over that one.
Right.
And some of the newer ones actually last for 3 months.
Hmm.
And in the US, they just recently released an injectable medication that's once a year. I don't know if it's something we'll see in Canada or not, but I think some people, depending on where you live, are pretty excited about that option.
Can you think of any other tips that people should be aware of?
You want to wear some socks and proper clothing. Probably your best friend, especially if you're a camper, is going to be a lint roller to take them off.
Okay.
They're really small. Some of these
Yes.
stages are, some people call them poppy seed ticks. Still, a stage of the black-legged tick or the ixodes still can transmit Lyme. So I tell people you got to do that tick check like a dog. All those places behind your ear, your belly button, between your toes.
Yes.
They're so small that they can easily be missed.
Yes. A lint roller. That's an excellent
Yeah,
suggestion.
you're coming in from mowing the grass, up and down your legs. You'd be surprised at what you can find. And some of the stores like Mark's, they actually sell permethrin infused clothing for those people that work in the woods.
Right.
So that's going to give them some pretty good protection. And from what I understand, it's not enough that we need to worry about toxicity in our pets, like our cats or anything like that, but pretty effective for helping people deal with that tick concern.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
some places even sell bands that you put around your boots or your shoes or your
Right.
ankles to kind of try to keep them from climbing from the ground up. That's only going to work for anything below the band.
Can you think of anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like the people to know?
I think that animals serve as a good sentinel, for emerging conditions like Lyme. To see the amount of cases that come in positive, where we have a definite upward trend, that we probably should be a little bit more aware for people. And I can't speak for the human side and physicians and what they're screening for, but I would not hesitate to tell anybody in my family if they're having these symptoms, like, talk to your doctor.
It was really helpful hearing from a veterinarian. I think pet owners will appreciate hearing your expertise.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Looking at Lyme. Tune in next time to hear from more experts from Canada and around the world. And remember, don't bring the outdoors indoors. Check for ticks.